It is July 1933, and a bond salesman named Gerald MacGuire is sitting in Smedley Butler's living room in Newton Square, Pennsylvania. Butler is 51 years old. He has 2 Medals of Honor, 33 years of Marine service, and a public reputation for saying things powerful men prefer not to hear. MacGuire has $18,000 in cash in his briefcase. MacGuire says he represents a group of men who want Butler to speak at the American Legion Convention in Chicago. The speech is already written. It calls for a return to the gold standard. Butler reads it. He declines. MacGuire fans the cash on the table. The expenses are covered, he says. Butler declines again and shows him out. MacGuire comes back. Over the next several months, through late 1933 and into 1934, the proposal grows. The gold standard speech is dropped. What MacGuire describes now is larger, a veterans organization, 500,000 men, armed and organized, marching on Washington. Roosevelt would not be removed, not at first. He would be kept as a figurehead. The real governing power would pass to a newly created Secretary of General Affairs, a post modeled, MacGuire explains, on what Mussolini had done in Italy and what the Croix de Feu was attempting in France. Butler would lead the veterans. He would be, MacGuire says, the man on the white horse. The financing, MacGuire claims, comes from men with resources to match the ambition. He names Robert Sterling Clark, heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune, worth an estimated $30 million. He describes backing from figures connected to Wall Street banking houses. The operational budget, he puts at $3 million to start. Butler listens through multiple meetings. He asks questions. He says nothing to the press. In September 1934, Butler asks Paul Comley French to help him. French is a journalist at the Philadelphia Record and a Marine veteran. Butler trusts him. French meets independently with MacGuire, who, apparently believing French is sympathetic, repeats the core claims. French reports back. The conversations happened, the money was real, and MacGuire had traveled to Europe earlier that year. The European trip matters because MacGuire's own letters document it. He wrote to his employer Grayson Murphy, a Wall Street banker and director at Guaranty Trust, describing visits to fascist paramilitary movements in France, Germany, and Italy. He wrote that he was studying how veterans had been organized to support authoritarian governments. When those letters later surface in the congressional record, they become the clearest corroboration that MacGuire was not simply inventing things. Butler has heard enough. He contacts the House of Representatives. On November 20, 1934, Butler testifies before the House Special Committee on Un-American Activities, chaired by John McCormick of Massachusetts and Samuel Dickstein of New York. The hearings are closed. The testimony will not be made public for weeks. Butler is precise. He names MacGuire, Clark, and Murphy. He describes the meetings in sequence, with dates, locations, and direct quotes as he recalls them. He describes the plan for what it is: the replacement of constitutional government with something modeled on European fascism, justified to veterans as a defense of the gold standard and the American economy against Roosevelt's New Deal. French testifies separately and corroborates the structure of the conversations. MacGuire also testifies. He denies everything. In February 1935, the committee releases its final report. It concludes that certain persons made an attempt to establish a fascist organization in this country. It states that Butler's testimony is credible and that the evidence was strong in support of the contention that a super-organization was planned. The committee confirms MacGuire's European trip and notes that his letters to Murphy are consistent with what Butler described. But the published report is shorter than the testimony. The names of the major alleged financiers, men whose names appear in the closed session transcripts, including figures connected to the newly formed American Liberty League, are absent from the final public document. McCormick will later say names were removed to avoid potential libel liability. No explanation for which names, or on whose authority, is ever formally given. No one is charged with anything. MacGuire dies of pneumonia in 1935 before any further legal proceeding can begin. The press is largely dismissive. Time magazine, in December 1934, calls the story a plot without plotters. The New York Times covers it briefly and skeptically. Butler's reputation for combativeness, he had publicly called Mussolini a hit-and-run driver, had been court-martialed and then reinstated, makes him easy to frame as unreliable. Butler publishes War is a Racket in 1935. He spends his remaining years giving speeches across the country, warning that American democracy is not immune to the kind of seizure he believed he had been recruited to lead. He dies in June 1940, months before the United States enters the war he had predicted. The McCormack-Dickstein Committee carries a footnote that only becomes visible decades later. In the 1990s, after Soviet archives open, historians document that Samuel Dickstein, one of the two men who chaired the 1934 investigation, was a paid informant for the NKVD, Soviet intelligence, during this period. His handlers codenamed him Crook and considered him unreliable but useful. The committee that took Butler's testimony about one foreign-inspired conspiracy was partly run by a man serving another. The 1934 congressional record remains publicly available. The names omitted from the final report appear in the original testimony. The American Liberty League was founded in August 1934, months after the events Butler describes, by executives from DuPont, General Motors, and the financial sector. Whether that organization was the institutional expression of what MacGuire had been pitching, or simply a legal lobbying group that shared some personnel and some philosophy, the documentary record does not resolve. What it does establish is that the men Butler named had the money, the motive, and the organization. What they did not have, in the end, was Smedley Butler.